Welcome to the What Really Happened radio show. The history the government hopes you never learn. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Friday, April 8th, 2016, end of the week. Thank goodness it's Friday, Kaahumanu Friday, going into the weekend here. We have a lot of stuff to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645. Somebody's already calling in. Brad is in our control room handling the telephone duties and otherwise keeping us out of trouble. Couple of quick program notes. Of course, this being Friday, the lovely Lady Claire will be joining us in our third hour. Also, I just got an email back from Montgomery Sibley, the lawyer for Deborah Jean Palfrey. He's agreed to be on the show. We haven't nailed which date it's going to be, probably sometime next week. So that's going to definitely be a barn burner of an interview to have him on the show. Okay, let's get on into it. Obviously, especially if you're looking at the corporate media, they're just talking constantly about the political campaign. And over at the We Hate Donald Trump Network, formerly Fox News, they're talking about how the Democratic National Committee has said there will be no contested convention for the Democrats. Everybody's pushing for a contested convention over at the GOP in order to kick out Donald Trump. But the fact that Bernie Sanders is closing in on Hillary is starting to worry a lot of people, especially if these superdelegates that are committed to Hillary just get cold feet. Now, in the past, the superdelegates tended to vote the same way as the allocated delegates, according to the popular vote. And Hillary's trying to use this loophole, along with Debbie Wasserman Schultz, to say, oh, no, the superdelegates control the process. And the Democratic National Committee is feeling as much pressure from rank-and-file Democrat voters as the GOP leadership is from GOP voters. And so there's been talk that if Bernie continues to gain on Hillary, even with her superdelegate advantage, there will not be a first ballot victory, and it will go to a brokered convention. That will be an historic first, where both conventions in the same election year, Republican and Democrat, go to a brokered floor fight. And the Democratic leader, no way will it happen. We won't let it happen. We're going with our candidate, and you just sit down. Meanwhile, Donald Trump, despite Wisconsin being stolen from him, and at this point it's pretty obvious that's what happened, he's starting to pick up more and more endorsements. Rudy Giuliani is saying that he is going to vote for Donald Trump. And Trump is picking up a lot of other endorsements here and there and everywhere. And the reality is he is the popular favorite. There is no question he's the popular favorite. He's got more grassroots support right now than Ron Paul had in 2008 and 2012. And the GOP is absolutely risking self-destructing by continuing on this path of saying, we're going to choose the candidates and you just sit down and shut up and do what we tell you. Because that's not democracy. That's not what America is supposed to be about. All righty. I thought we had a caller on the line. I don't know where they went. Okay. Darn, I didn't move fast enough. Okay, so another article coming out of ScannedRetina.com, voter fraud in Wisconsin, Trump leading by a ton in district-by-district search. And what they're finding out from analyzing Wisconsin is Trump was leading pretty much the entire state except for a couple of very large regions where the vote just seemed to go the other way. And the exit polls and the mail-in ballots and the ahead-of-time polls are all lining up. Where the difference is in those districts with the electronic machines. They're the ones that went the other way, and we know how suspect those machines are here. Now, there's a YouTube video out there, which we linked to the front page of WhatReallyHappened.com. Same theme. Bernie Sanders has been cheated out of thousands of votes. And there is considerable evidence that there was vote fraud going on against Bernie Sanders, but it wasn't enough to overcome a landslide. Remember, that's the weakness of election fraud. It can shift the results a few percentage points here and there, but it can't reverse a landslide, or everybody knows that's what happened. And they pushed it too far on Trump because nobody's believing that, especially after all the other election fraud we've seen. This is the crookedest election in U.S. history, and the rest of the world is laughing at us because the United States justifies its interventions into other countries because we're bringing them democracy and the people will rule. And then we find out here in the United States of America we don't have a democracy. We have rigged elections. It's all a big hoax and a charade, so that every 4 years we have to pick one or the other of the pre-approved anointed candidates. And it almost seems like they're desperate to prove that's what they're doing this year, so we'll just stop complaining about it. Certainly, this idea of continuing to push Ted Cruz as the Trump killer is nonsense, both because of the sex scandals, the preacher saying let's kill all the gays scandal, and of course his citizenship issue, which is absolutely not resolved, and there's some developments along that line. Now, not too long ago, there was a gentleman who came up with a really good election system called the True Vote. And the way it worked is that you would go into the balloting place, you would touch screen your candidates, and then it would print a paper ballot underneath a plexiglass that you could look at and verify that what was on that paper was what you touched on the screen. And you had your choice of discarding that or approving it. And if you approved it, it then was fed into the ballot box. And you, the voter, got a printed receipt with a code number on it, which you could use to go to a website and track your vote all the way up to the National Tabulation Center. It was an absolutely wonderful system. It was invented by a guy named Ethan Gibbs. Unfortunately, he died in a very mysterious car crash on Highway 65 in Tennessee in 2004, and the True Vote system just kind of went away, and we got Diebold instead. So, the people in power don't want any changes to the system. They've worked very long and very hard to get this system that they've got now, where you believe in these phony elections, you believe vaccines are safe, you believe GMO is good for you, and you believe that you must pay taxes so that the rich don't have to. But it's all starting to come apart. Now, getting on back to Ted Cruz, interesting little article out of Israel National News. Cruz in a kippah, God bless Netanyahu. And basically, they're talking about how Ted Cruz was speaking to Orthodox Jews in Brooklyn. He's campaigning for the New York caucus. And Cruz is promising that Obama's cold shoulder to Israel will end in January. Well, Mr. Cruz, if you love Israel so much, why aren't you over there trying to bluff your way into the presidency in Tel Aviv? They may not even have a requirement that you be a natural-born citizen over there. Which brings us to an announcement put out by the North American Law Center. And basically they're saying Ted Cruz has got 2 weeks to admit his citizenship claim is a complete fraud and step down, or they're going to do a massive document dump, which they're saying not only confirms that Ted Cruz is not a natural-born U.S. citizen, it says he never became a U.S. citizen at all. There's some questions about that. There's the paperwork that should be there isn't there, and they're calling into question Cruz's eligibility to have even been in the Senate, which requires that you be a U.S. citizen, not natural born. That's a distinction reserved for the presidency. But they claim that they have the goods on Cruz. The New York Daily News ran a front page, and we've got it on the front page of WhatReallyHappened.com, where they basically tell Ted Cruz, take the F-U train, Ted. You look at the opposition that this guy is building, and the only way he can be getting the votes and delegates he's getting is through fraud. And remember what I pointed out about how the delegates in Wisconsin were awarded? Cruz got 6 times as many delegates as Trump, even though he only beat Trump by 13%. Got to take a break for commercials. We'll be back with a whole bunch of phone calls after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. Now, according to an Emerson College Polling Society survey released today, Donald Trump has a 34-point lead in New York. And that is going to be very difficult to erase with election fraud. In fact, if it is erased with election fraud, everybody's going to know that's exactly what happened. All right, let's go ahead and grab a couple of phone calls. Tom in Minnesota, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Michael. First I want to give kind of a little brief history. I'm from Minnesota, of course, and we refer to our governor, those in the know as Governor Goofy, because he admits has massive depression and is on psychotropics.
Oh, boy, that's a bad sign.
Yeah, it is. Well, you just look at his eyes whenever you see a picture of him. And then he is a Dayton. I don't know if you're familiar with who the Dayton family is.
Yes.
Yeah, the Target company, and then corporation. And then also he was married to a Rockefeller who donated a lot to his campaign, even though they were divorced. So those connections are still there. So he comes out and a couple days ago and goes, don't travel to these states or do business with them because of the LGBT issue, right?
Yes.
And then I see Bloomberg comes out and he's now using that for these states have come out with constitutional carry, so don't go, do business and travel to these states. Isn't there one responsibility somehow under the Commerce Clause of Congress that one of their jobs of the federal government is to make sure there's unimpeded free trade between the states, and what they're encouraging actually?
They're supposed to be, but I think these are political season comments made by these governors because they're absolutely unenforceable. And I think probably the residents of the respective states are just saying, what are they talking about? I'm going to go where I feel like going. I mean, the idea of telling New Yorkers they can't go to Florida. I mean, New Yorkers love to go to Florida, especially in the winter months. And it's still cold up there. I imagine they're going to ignore these guys. And I think that's probably good advice for Americans right now. You know that everything coming out of the politicians' mouths are lies. Let's stop listening to them.
I suppose that would be different if they actually he said, we got some we buy from North Carolina or Georgia or whatever it is, and we don't buy from them anymore because of that. Well, then I think it would become an issue, maybe.
It would, but this comes across as election season grandstanding to me, and I don't think they're going to get traction with it.
Yeah, I was just hoping there's a legal way to shut them up.
Well, no, because especially during campaign season, they can say whatever they want, and that's protected by the First Amendment. If they actually took steps within the authority and power of their office, if they did something overt, like security gates at the airport, you're not allowed to go on this flight to Florida, then it would be actionable. But they can say whatever nonsense they want. And it's considered protected free speech, and we can all sit here and laugh at it, and that's our protected free speech under the First Amendment.
Okay. Well, thanks.
All right, thank you. We're going to switch over to Mary in Michigan. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, hello, Mike, and I'm so glad to get to talk to you. I so often want to call in when you're talking, and it didn't have the number or didn't have the time. So I looked it up the other day so I'd have it when I needed it.
Excellent.
What I wanted to say was, this is, as we all know, a very unusual election year, and I used to be very involved in elections, chief judge, and at the polling place and all that kind of stuff, League of Women Voters, all that kind of stuff. And I've just steadily seen how much control and shenanigans have been going on with it. It just totally disgusts me. But I also ran for office and did not prevail in the primary election, but I went down and registered as a write-in, and I almost won that way.
Mm-hmm.
And through all of that experience, I found out that, in my opinion, the only way to defeat the machine is for everybody to write a write-in, or vote with a write-in. I don't care who you choose, and they can already even be on the ballot.
Okay, you could write me in, Rivero 2016.
No,
okay,
I'm
but
serious.
I know. On a more serious note, here's a problem with that.
Really,
okay,
what's that?
There's a problem with that. In the good old days where all the ballots were paper, there was always a space on the back for a write-in. Now, in the age of the electronic machines, they have to have a special form if you say, I want to write in a candidate, and they never have enough of those forms. If people start going into the polling places and saying, I want to write in Donald Trump, and they're going to say, we ran out of the forms, sorry. I mean, that's the grassroots way of shaping the election, is controlling the number of polling places, having them run out of ballots, having them run out of write-in forms.
Well, I knew that they would, that there were chances it wouldn't work with these touch screens and all this. Now, I don't even know why anybody votes on those paper ballot, but when I was involved with it, you had the little computer that you fed the piece of the card into.
Yes.
And it, and there were 3 spaces, and it was the 2 candidates for that position, and then a write-in slot. That's not there anymore.
No, not in the all electronic machines. There's a special. There's supposed to be a special form if you want a write-in or if you want a paper ballot, but they only have a few. They have a token number of those there, and it's just a way of shutting out write-ins. They have worked very hard to create this controllable election process. They're not going to leave any gaps there for we the people to have any say about what's going on.
There should be a way to sue Diebold. I swear to Pete, there ought to be a way to sue them. They have rigged this whole thing, and if this all goes against Trump, even if it doesn't, I hope that he spends some of his money to expose those that.
Okay, well let's be fair. It's not just Diebold. It's Sequoia. It's ES&S. They all are. That's their business, is to steal the elections and make say, hey, it came out of the computer. It must be accurate and true. Well, computer programmers are always saying, they call it the GIGO law, garbage in, garbage out. And look at all the computer simulations the global warming Nazis were waving at us to prove that the Earth was warming up and it was all our fault. So,
well, they've even had groups that have proved that you can rig those machines, voting on them, remotely and changing it remotely.
Oh yeah, it's dozens and dozens
it's been proven.
Yeah, many times, and yet the government sits out there and says, "Well, okay, there's some problems, but trust us, it didn't change the actual outcome," which is an unsupportable statement because if you have detected fraud in any election, you don't know that you've found it all. In fact, the logical conclusion is there's probably more that you didn't find. So it's absolutely unsupportable. Once you've detected election fraud, it's unsupportable to say it doesn't actually change the final result. What they're telling you is we will not change the official final result. Okay?
Okay. Well, thank you.
Thank you, and we got to let you go. We're going to take a break for some commercials, and we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Now, we are just getting word. Ted Cruz's campaign is out there saying that if Donald Trump fails to get 50% of the vote in New York, which is his home state, that he should drop out. He should just quit right then and there and let Ted Cruz have the White House the way God intended. Well, if God had anointed Ted Cruz to be president of the United States, why did he have him born in Canada? Little inconsistency there. Now, of course, it is a 3-way race. Trump, Cruz, and Kasich. Kasich's only staying in there because Soros gave him $700,000 to stay in, to force a brokered convention. But obviously, the Cruz campaign is still very much afraid of Donald Trump. What they should be afraid of is more and more Americans coming to understand that Ted Cruz is not a natural-born U.S. citizen and is not eligible to be president under the Constitution. And the courts may look the other way, but if Americans decide he can't be president, they're not going to vote for him. And all the election rigging that's going on is not going to save him. All right, we're going to go ahead and grab ourselves a couple of phone calls. Ray in Indiana, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. I'm glad to catch you live. I'm a regular podcast listener, and my schedule's changed here. I now get to run home and catch you here at the end. Claire's not there today?
Well, she'll be here in the third hour. This is the middle of the first hour, so you got lots of time. Sit back and relax.
Oh, wow.
Claire's going to be here, in an hour and a half.
Okay, well, I'll definitely tell you. I didn't realize our schedules were so different. But anyway, just a couple things. I think the ultimate irony in free market capitalism, which we no longer have, is the free market of the rest of the world is deciding which currency is best, and we're losing out. And I think it's ironic that we're losing out on the free market on currency. And hopefully somebody will get around to that and get a little.
Well, you need to understand, in global economics, it was never intended to be a free market. The Bretton Woods Agreement at the end of World War II mandated the world always use the U.S. dollar for global trade and banking. And then Richard Nixon ended gold convertibility. They switched over to the petrodollar deal to keep international demand for dollars up. But now more and more countries are selling their oil for other currencies at the risk of invasion by the United States. The U.S. is using the current war policy to try and force the world back to the Bretton Woods Agreement, and the world definitely does not want to go. The ruble and the yuan are looking very attractive despite attempts at economic warfare, like that oil price war, which backflashed horribly on Western countries.
Yeah, excellent point. Yeah, and then speaking of legal tender, that money reserve commercial keeps saying that gold coin is legal tender. Is that a big deal or not, or is that just because it's a gold coin, is it a legal tender?
Well, legal tender is basically tender that is recognized as valid by the U.S. government. I actually have not looked into this commercial or its product. I probably ought to, because I'm bothered by their use of the phrase legal tender, because that implies that it's issued in accordance with the U.S. Treasury Department. Now, as far as tender itself is concerned, legal or otherwise, if you look on the front of the Federal Reserve note, it says this bill is legal tender for all debts, public and private. It doesn't say it's the only one. If you're carrying on commerce with your friends and neighbors, you can use whatever currency you want to use between yourselves. Monopoly money, seeds, silver, gold, bunches of bananas, whatever. But I do have a problem with that legal tender phrase on that commercial, and I will look into the issue, okay?
Thank you. No, it struck me odd, too, the first time I heard it. One more quick thing. You talked about the shut-off on your phones doing the video and all, and pictures and all that. If you take out the SIM card, will they be able to shut down your phone?
Well, if you take out the SIM card, your phone isn't going to work anyway.
Well, you can still take pictures and video.
Actually, it's a lot easier just to get a dedicated camera, one that doesn't have Wi-Fi or anything in it. But I do know that there has been a proposed law where all digital cameras and camcorders or video cameras are going to have a remote shut-off capability so that you don't take pictures at concerts or anything like that. It didn't really get a lot of traction. But it has been, and the ultimate aim of this, of course, is when the police are beating the crud out of protesters exercising their First Amendment right to freedom of speech, they want to be able to disable all the camcorders and cameras in the area so that there's no evidence of what they're doing. And I think that's the real reason behind this proposed law. But the last I heard, it wasn't going anywhere.
Okay, well, that's good. But I was thinking the shut-off came through the signal. That's why I thought if you took out the SIM card, then they wouldn't be able to shut it off.
Well, I'm really not sure about that. Anyway, listen, Ray, I got to let you go. We're coming up on a commercial break, and I want to switch over here to Chip in North Carolina. Thank you for waiting patiently. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike, real honor. I've been a big fan for many years. I'm not sure whether you've covered this story or not. I was reading a couple of days ago on Russia Today where a fellow up in Pennsylvania sued the Cruz campaign to have his name removed from the ballot up there, and his case lost. Basically, in my opinion, because of a faulty argument. Basically, he acknowledged the fact that his mother was a citizen of the United States the whole time. Now,
no, she was not.
My opinion, well, that's my understanding.
Well, he may have said that. He probably did say that. I mean, but we know Ted Cruz lies about his mother. He was trying to tell us the other day she was a computer programmer but never knew how to type. The reality is that Ted Cruz's mother became a Canadian citizen, and we know that because her name shows up on Canadian voting records of the time. And back then, Canada did not recognize dual citizenship. To be a Canadian citizen, you had to renounce your previous citizenship, and both of Ted Cruz's parents did that. Now, when they came to the United States of America, for the first 12 years he was here, technically Ted Cruz was an illegal immigrant. And it was after that his mother filed this consular record of a birth abroad to get a U.S. passport for Ted Cruz so he could go on a school-sponsored travel experience. However, that itself was fraudulent, because if she was a Canadian citizen at the time of the birth, then she's not supposed to be able to fill out that document. In any event, we've got this law center that's coming on out and saying in about 2 weeks they're going to spill the beans on Ted Cruz, rather.
Well, in my opinion, if I were to knew that I was ineligible to run for office like that, it would probably benefit me to send somebody in with illegitimate argument like that to hoodwink the voters.
Well, the arguments they've been using is, they're trying to claim that natural born has no meaning whatsoever. But it did have a very clear meaning, and it meant something special because it's applied only to the President of the United States, not to the members of Congress. So it clearly had some significance to the Founding Fathers. There are no wasted words in the Constitution. Anyway, listen, we're coming up here on another commercial break. The reality is the courts are just as corrupt as any other part of the government, and they're going to go along with this agenda. I guarantee you, if Ted Cruz wins the GOP nomination, Hillary's lawyers are going to go right to the Supreme Court, and they're going to have him kicked off the ballot, and we're going to have just one name in November, and that is not democracy. That is a feature of dictatorship, presidential elections with only one name on the ballot. So, anyway, thank you very much for the phone call. All right, good to talk to you. We're going to let you go and take another break here for a few words of commerce. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here, and we're just watching the successful launch of SpaceX Dragon capsule on its way to resupply the International Space Station. And about 10 minutes from now, they're going to try one more time to have the booster return safely and intact and land on a barge. That's been a big problem for them. The idea is they want to come up with a reusable space launch system that's less expensive and less complicated than the shuttle was. And that recovery of the booster, that's been kind of the problem. So cross your fingers, and I wish them well. Interestingly enough, they're taking along a new experimental inflatable module for the space station. So they're going to, instead of taking up these big pre-built rigid structures, they're going to have these little inflatable things. One of the listeners actually sent me an illustration of the space station with one of those inflatable bouncy castles on the side. We have some very clever people in our audience. All righty, getting on back to some serious stuff. Apparently Hillary Clinton was at a fundraiser in Denver, and whatever she was telling to the people writing the checks, she didn't want it to be made public. And so outside, the Clinton campaign had set up these noise machines, that basically static noise generators and amplifiers and speakers, so that the reporters outside couldn't hear what she was saying. And that, I think, tells you an awful lot. Somebody's got to put up a video of those noise machines. Right now, Hillary Clinton's weak spot is that people see her as untrustworthy. And this kind of a stunt only makes matters worse. There's another article that came out of Investment Watch blog on how Hillary's donors are using state loopholes to funnel millions of dollars into her campaign without leaving a trace. And this leads to a second article that came out of Oraz.com. Hillary Clinton's campaign built on a mountain of secret cash. And I think somewhere in there we need to be finding out if money from the Clinton so-called charitable foundation is somehow being laundered and funneled in to support her run for the White House. Now, the Clintons are dealing with another issue. As you remember, there was a big stink over Jeff Epstein's little Caribbean island getaway, where he had all these little houses, and he was basically holding these sex parties. And it included Bill Clinton was down there, the Prince of Wales was down there, or one of the princes, I forget which ones. All those princes look alike to me. And the story at the time was, well, yes, they were underage girls, but all they did was give massages, really, and that was it. Well, apparently, according to this story that came, it's a YouTube video, and we have it on the front page of What Really Happened, one of the underage girls that was on the island has gone public and said, to nobody's surprise, yeah, it was all about sex between these elites and underage girls, in some cases underage boys. Group sex was the normal. And this was how Jeff Epstein was, building his power connections. And who knows, he was probably recording everything so he could use it as blackmail material later on. Now, John Kasich has once again reiterated he is staying in the GOP race until the very end, and he thinks he will emerge as the winner in a contested convention. because he's out there saying that he is the only Republican who can beat Hillary Clinton. The polls prove that he, John Kasich, can beat Hillary Clinton. Do you realize how laughable the propaganda has become? The guy in last place, the guy who needed $700,000 from Soros just to still be in the race, claims that he is the only GOP candidate who can go up against Hillary Clinton. Now, of course, Hillary would love to run against Kasich. She'd love to run against Cruz. She does not want to run against Trump. Hillary Clinton is replaying the strategy of Richard Nixon's re-election campaign. Engineer your opposition so that you can win. And that is not democracy either. Now, the other day we were talking about the governor down in Florida, Governor Scott. And there was this woman, Kara Jennings, who basically got up and got into his face about Scott's policies, cuts to Medicaid. She couldn't get Obamacare. She called him some very colorful language I cannot say on the radio. And she got into his face, and we applauded her. Now, in retaliation, Governor Scott's Political Action Committee, Let's Get to Work, has made a video about the woman, calling her a latte liberal and a terribly rude woman. How petty do you have to be to do that? I don't know what Governor Scott is thinking or his PAC is thinking. This makes him look like a bully. Anyway, now let's get on to the Panama Papers. This is the gift that keeps on giving. British members of Parliament are now demanding David Cameron step down, following yesterday's admission that, yes, David Cameron and his family did profit from his father's fortune hidden in those tax havens. And now remember, the day before, Cameron said, no, they didn't, so he was caught in a lie. And it's causing a bit of an uproar. Now, whoever engineered this release clearly intended to use it to go after Putin and Assad. And by the way, analysis of the already released documents, Putin's name doesn't appear there. Nothing connected directly to Putin, or for that matter, Assad. But this appears to be an attack on Russia, and like that poorly thought out oil price war, it has backfired horribly and is causing more damage in the West than on its intended targets. Edward Snowden is out there tweeting, saying that the British people should rise up and force David Cameron's resignation. And by the way, the Prime Minister of Iceland is still resigned. It's going to turn into another running joke like Generalissimo Francisco Franco. He's still dead. The Prime Minister of Iceland is still resigned, and they're in a little bit more trouble there. Now, the Solicitors Regulation Authority is opening investigations to each of the British and Wales firms revealed in the Panama Papers. I expect we're going to see some office buildings burned to the ground under mysterious circumstances. Oh, the records are gone. Sorry about that. All right. Now, a lot of people are commenting on the very strange juxtaposition that immediately after Iceland's prime minister resigns, the legislative body changes the laws in order to allow the crooked bankers to be set free from jail. Now, there may have been a warning. Maybe the reason Iceland's prime minister was targeted in this release was to show countries, heads of state, you don't arrest bankers. Bankers are above the laws of gods and men. But that, too, may be falling apart either. Iceland's coalition government is facing a no-confidence motion debate in their parliament. They have their own equivalent of a third party there, which is called the Pirate Party. You've got to love the sense of humor of the Icelandic people. And if elections are called, they may actually win. Right now, they've got 43% of the vote, ahead of the ruling coalition and all the other opposition parties. There could be a complete changeover of the Icelandic government coming out of this thing. Now, we're seeing a lot of articles here, this one's in Zero Hedge, talking about how the Panama Papers could end Hillary Clinton's campaign. And they're not talking about all the emerging direct links between these offshore tax havens and Sidney Blumenthal and the Clinton-associated lobbying firm. They're going back to the fact that Hillary Clinton lobbied for, supported, and applauded the passage of a law that made this kind of tax sheltering legal. And she did it standing in opposition to Bernie Sanders, who was up there in Congress saying, this is a bad law. This will open the door to tax evasion by the wealthy in the United States of America. And Sanders was proven right, and Hillary was proven wrong, at least in terms of the stated position of fighting tax avoidance by the rich. But remember, Hillary's rich. All this nonsense about they were poor and broke when they left the White House, it is nonsense. They're worth hundreds of millions of dollars. So, now the Panama Papers have fingered China's president, which is probably the reason China is now blocking all news about the Panama Papers inside their country. Their media can't touch it. The Internet is filtering it out. We got to take a break for news and commercials. We'll be right back with hour number 2. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 2. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645. Brad is still in the control room answering the phone, and we're just now getting word that SpaceX successfully landed, recovered their booster on the barge. They're going nuts. The champagne corks are popping, and congratulations to SpaceX. It is a tremendous achievement. So hats off to all of those people over there. Now, getting on back to the Panama Papers. There is a breaking story. Apparently somebody leaked a 2013 letter showing that David Cameron personally intervened to prevent offshore trust, such as those listed in the Panama Papers, such as those owned by his father, from being included in a European Union-wide crackdown on tax avoidance. This is getting worse and worse. And I understand members of Parliament for saying he's got to step down. He's being shown as a total hypocrite. The true story of the Panama Papers is not individual politicians who were caught in it. It's the scale. We have a ruling class that feels they should not pay taxes. That's your job. That's what you proletariat are for. You little people, you slaves and you serfs. You pay taxes so we don't have to. That's the attitude we're seeing all over the globe. Now, everybody's using the Panama Papers to push whatever agenda they're pushing, and now we're seeing this very bizarre story out of RINF.com, where the U.S. government is going to use the Panama Papers as justification to widen sanctions against Russia, even though the link between Putin and the Panama Papers is spurious at best. This is coming out of Bloomberg News. And again, getting into the raw data, not just taking what's being spoon-fed by the corporate media about the Panama Papers. There's a lot of interesting stuff coming out of there. Now remember, these records go back 40 years. And there's an interesting story involving a Modigliani painting called Man with Cane, or Seated Man with Cane. And apparently, there are records about it in the Panama Papers leaks. And what they're showing is this powerful family of international art dealers may be using one of these cutout shell companies to hide the fact that they own this painting. And this painting is at the middle of a high-stakes court battle over who does own it. And if you're having to hide the fact that you own a famous painting, it means you acquired that painting by, shall we say, less than above board means. We're going to be dealing with this Panama Papers stuff for a long time. I hope WikiLeaks goes ahead and just releases all the data. And I know it's a lot of information, but we're going to crowdsource it. Everybody gets a few pages and looks for anything really juicy and tasty in there. But the real scandal is the scale. How many world leaders leaders of nations who are out there screaming about you've got to pay your taxes and we're cracking down on tax avoidance, and then you find out they're avoiding taxes. Something for you all to be thinking about as you come up on the real April Fool's Day next week. Because remember, this Panama company is just one. It's the fourth largest. There are 3 larger companies doing this and a whole bunch of smaller ones operating right in the United States of America. So, turning to the war zones. The U.S., Turkey, and Saudi Arabia are now arming the terrorists in Syria with surface-to-air missiles to shoot down, presumably, Syrian and Russian warplanes. They're not giving up on getting Assad out of there. And they're willing to risk war with Russia to do it. What am I saying? Risk war with Russia. There are significant elements within the U.S. government who want war with Russia and China. They want to destroy the yuan and the renminbi and force the world back to the dollar. And they're willing to risk the incineration of the surface of planet Earth to do it. You know, Earth, schmirth, it's money. We're talking about money. We're talking about riches. More money for us. ISIS in Libya is supposedly now 6,000 strong. And they're there to give the United States an excuse to directly intervene yet again. Because this whole policy of conquering and regime changing all these nations to force them back to the dollar is falling apart. Ever since the Iranian Revolution of 1979, the world has come to realize what's really been going on behind the scenes of how the U.S. goes into a nation, they destabilize it, they bring down the elected democratic government of that nation, and they impose a dictatorship. You're being told we're bringing democracy to these people. But you know something? There hasn't been one true democracy emerge out of any of these U.S. interventions since the end of World War II. Not a single one. They always get people like the Shah of Iran, or the dictator Pinochet, or Ferdinand Marcos, or Batista. That's the reality. Now, over in the South China Sea, Vietnam is now demanding China remove a $1 billion oil rig from some of these disputed areas. And they're rattling the sabers over there. Of course, we know Vietnam itself cannot possibly be thinking about going to war with China. Vietnam is just the latest U.S. proxy to try and get a conflict going. Now, getting on over to the F-35. You would think, with a plane that is such a disaster, they would just shut the program off, take the existing aircraft, put them in air museums, and say, boy, doesn't that look good. But raising on a busted flush, after spending over $1 trillion to develop this F-35 Joint Strike Fighter, which is an inferior dogfighter to planes from the 1970s and 1980s, and has got a whole list of problems, the U.S. Air Force is going to spend another $500 million to upgrade installations at Allison Air Force Base to prepare for the aircraft's arrival. We're going to have red carpets, and we're going to have chrome, and we're going to have spotlights to show how great the aircraft looks in those hangars that it will hardly ever get out of. But, unfortunately, there is no money to provide safe drinking water for Flint and the thousands of other cities across America. We have to spend it on weapons and wars. George Bernard Shaw is one of my favorite authors, and he wrote a work called Man and Superman. And one of the acts within it is called Don Juan in Hell, which is often done as a reader's theater piece. And there's a wonderful quote in there by the devil. There's nothing in man's industry but his greed and his sloth. His heart is in his weapons. Shaw knew what he was talking about there. All right, we're going to grab a phone call. John of Barbados, I may have to take you to the commercial break. What's on your mind?
Hello, Michael. Yeah, looking at this nonsense, I think Mr. Kerry and Mr. Obama should change their names to Stan Oliver, Oliver and Hardy. The nonsense, they keep getting us into awful trouble.
Yes, this is another fine mess you got us into.
That's exactly right. Yeah, I'm looking at what's happening in the Brexit and this nonsense with Cameron. I mean, Cameron's position now is untenable. He has to go.
Absolutely. And you know something? This is just going to accelerate support for the Brexit, because everybody understands it's all this globalism that opened up all these channels for these kinds of games, these systems by which the elite are not paying taxes, which increases our tax burden. And the anger is building all over the globe. This push for a global government has created a situation leading to a potential global revolution. That would be one for the history books. We got to take a break for commercials. Stay on, John, just hold there. I'm going to bring you back after the commercial break. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And John in Barbados, why don't you pick up where you left off?
Okay, I think the biggest scandal is that this isn't the biggest company, but it's worse than that, because now we're learning through very selective releases that this information is only a fraction of what's available.
Yes.
And people are looking at it, and what the analysts are saying is this was not released by an insider from this firm.
No, the law firm is saying they were hacked into from someplace in Europe.
Yeah, well, CIA, but...
well, we don't know that. That's a speculation. Could have been NSA, could have been... We don't know at this point.
Yeah, but it appears that they're only attacking America's enemies. I mean, Xi Jinping, the Chinese premier, is involved, but his name, like Putin's, does not appear anywhere in the papers. You know, this nonsense. And what this is looking like, this thing is going to bring down the whole international central banking system and banking system, because there's so many banks involved.
That would be a good thing. You know, we need those private central banks to all be destroyed and go back to an economy that works for the people and the nations. You know, because if we don't, the goal of these private central banks is a single global society and a single private central bank holding us all in debt slavery forever until we go extinct. And the future of humanity demands that we get these private central banks shut down.
There is another little aspect which has only appeared today. Somebody recorded a conversation between IMF individuals which suggests that they're going to cause a massive crisis, economic crisis in Britain, to prevent British Brexit from Europe, the exit from Europe.
Yeah,
and it's being published all over the place. So people are now waking up to the fact that these bankers are causing so much chaos that we need to get rid of them.
Well, we need to bring them back under control, and I want to clarify for I want to clarify for our listeners. We need to draw a line between the traditional depositor bank model that we were all taught about in school. You put your money in a savings account, the bank pools it, loans it out, earns interest, shares the interest with you. That type of bank has a legitimate, valid, useful function for our communities and our society. What we're talking about here specifically are called private central banks, which are basically stealing the authority to issue the public currency of a nation, and inevitably they issue it as a loan at interest. So they're making money off of all the commerce of the nation. And all it costs them is ink and paper and numbers typed into a computer. And these private central bankers have been playing this scam on the human race for 300 years. It is time for it to come to an end. And anytime a country... John, let me finish this. Anytime a country tries to break free of private central banking, the other nations all enslaved to private central banks will gang up on them and destroy them. And if you have not already read my article, All Wars Are Bankers' Wars, you need to look at that. And that will tell you the history of the United States and, in fact, much of the world in terms of these greedy bankers wanting to keep an iron-fisted control over the commerce of the entire world. And you need to remember, private central banks do not serve the community. They do not serve the people. They do not serve the nation. They serve themselves. And the politicians who give these banks legal counterfeiting powers are traitors to their own people in their own country.
Well, I think it's worse than that, Michael, because the rules were changed. And even the ordinary type bank that you're talking about were given leeway to actually become mercantile banks. And so this mercantile section, say, of Goldman Sachs is able to fiddle lots of things like the derivatives and what have you.
Well, that was why Glass-Steagall was passed following the Depression of the 1930s, and then in 1990 they revoked it. They said Wall Street can be trusted not to make the same mistakes again, and of course Wall Street immediately made the same mistakes again, which is what led to the crash of 2008. Anyway, listen, John, I need to let you go. I got a lot of stuff to cover before the Lady Claire comes on in here, so thank you very much for the phone call. And, you know, sometimes Pope Francis will say some things I think are really weird, and other times he says things that makes a lot of sense. And one of the things he said that we should all be listening to is that money should be the servant of the people. The people should not be the servant of the money. And he's absolutely right. We are all slaves to the banks rather than the banks working for us. What the United States needs, what all of these nations need, is a public currency that is managed as a public utility, not a privatized for-profit venture. See, here's the thing. Under the current system, you don't have a choice not to be paying interest to the private central bank. When you're using that legal tender, it's accruing interest as it passes from hand to hand to hand, from employer to worker to grocery store to farmer, and back around again. It is accruing interest to that private central bank. The private central bank is making a fortune off of you, the American people. That's why they resist an audit so much. They've even threatened to crash the economy rather than face an audit, because an audit would reveal just how much wealth these bankers have made with their legalized counterfeiting operation off of your backs. Anyway, getting on back to Europe, the Dutch referendum may have unleashed a European continental crisis. And the situation is right now, this deal to close ties between the European Union and Ukraine requires the ratification of all member states of the European Union. And the Netherlands has not done so. This referendum was to get a sense of the population. And to a lot of people's surprise, in the pro-EU side, the Dutch people voted 2/3 against moving to tighter relations with Ukraine. Part of that is just common sense. The U.S. coup d'etat in Kiev, followed by months of war and bloodshed and destruction of the infrastructure, have left Ukraine debt-stricken and not really worth all that much other than for bragging rights. And the people of the European Union are already tired of being impoverished to prop up the more debt-crippled members of the EU. The last thing they want is another debt-crippled member nation coming on in that they're going to be expected to pay for. So if the government of the Netherlands ignores their own voters to ratify this agreement, it could trigger a revolution in the Netherlands. That's how serious this is. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Now, as you know, Israel tries to shield itself from criticism over its actions by constantly wagging Nazis and Hitler and Germany at us all, even though whatever it is that was supposed to have happened before we were even born. And Israel's attitude is, we inherit the guilt from what happened back then. Not really, actually. We here in America, we were on the other side. But Israel doesn't seem to think that that counts. I refuse to accept any blame or guilt for anything that happened before I was born. Absolutely. Now, as you know, in order to keep on playing this guilt game, to keep this Holocaust thing going, to use as a shield by Israel's government, they're always out there wagging Nazis at us. And they're always hunting down old Nazis and putting them on show trials and say, oh, this person was, fed the dogs at Auschwitz and therefore they're equally guilty for the 18 Brazilian people who died there. And they had another one. Former guard. I mean, they even took a guy who worked in the clinic at one point. People who worked in the office had nothing to do with what was going on out in these slave labor factories. And said, we put them up there. See, we need more money because the Nazis are there. Well, they had this 93-year-old former guard at Auschwitz, and his trial for crimes on the Holocaust was supposed to start next week, and the world's media was gathering to just broadcast this all over the TV networks and remind us about why we must always support Israel no matter what horrors they're doing in Palestine or Syria or Lebanon, or for that matter. And the guy up and died on them. And, 93, he had a good life. But, of course, you've got Netanyahu who's out there, well, what do we do now? We've run out of Nazis. Let's dig them up and stuff them, and put them on the stand and have the trial anyway. And that really is a problem. They've run out of Nazis. I mean, again, they're grabbing people who were clerks, who were cleaning out the dog kennels and trying to put them on trial. And there has actually been a serious suggestion coming out of Israel that the children of the Nazis should be put on trial for what their parents did. I mean, that's really out there. That's really out there. Now, as John in Barbados was mentioning, WikiLeaks has broken the story that the IMF is planning to trigger a major economic crisis in Britain before the Brexit vote to basically put the British people in a situation of, if you don't vote to merge with the EU, we're going to cut you loose and let your economy crash. And it is a reminder that all of these private central banks around the world are a gang of brothers who are working together to loot the wealth of the planet and put it in their pockets. Their ultimate aim is a single global population of workers permanently, irrevocably in debt to a single central bank. They're bringing back feudalism and serfdom. And they're very close to accomplishing their plans. And as we look at the exposures in the Panama Papers, we begin to realize these very rich people don't feel they should have to pay taxes. Christine Lagarde, the head of the IMF, pays no taxes. It's in her contract. Did you know the Federal Reserve Bank here in the United States doesn't pay any taxes at all, other than taxes on the real estate their banks sit on? It's in the Federal Reserve's charter. They're not taxed on any of their activities. So do you see how it works? Taxes are for you, the little people. The nobility doesn't have to pay tax. The nobility's job is to collect the taxes and spend them and have fun with them, and your job is to just work yourself to death to make them rich. That's the model. The reality of our society is little changed from medieval times. They just changed the names and titles and costumes to make us think it's something new that's working better for us, but it isn't. Story out of Investment Watch blog. The economic recovery mirage is fading fast. Countries are implementing capital controls and printing larger bills, except, of course, for here in the U.S., where they're getting ready to outlaw the $100 bill in the push toward the cashless society, where all of your money is in their control no matter what. Doesn't matter how much you work and how much you make, they have it. They get to play with it. You don't. Very alarming story coming out of Washington's blog. Deutsche is the new Lehman Brothers. And all they do is they posted a chart overlaying the current performance of Deutsche Bank with Lehman Brothers just before they fell apart. And the chart says it all. That's why they're desperate to get your money. They're desperate to get your money locked into their banks to keep their little Ponzi scheme going a little bit longer. But you know what's the problem with Ponzi schemes? They always fall apart. There's no way to perpetuate them. They're not stable. They just want to let the crash happen after somebody else holds the office. Another story out of Investment Watch blog. U.S. corporate debt goes through the roof, making recession virtually inevitable. This is from SocGen's Albert Edwards. Now, Stanley Druckenmiller, he's a hedge fund manager, is out there confirming what we were hearing a few years ago. The true U.S. debt, U.S. government debt, is $205 trillion with a T. The U.S. government lies about everything. The unemployment numbers, of course, they're lying about the debt. They want to convince you the debt can be paid off if you're just willing to work harder and live poorer and turn over more to the government, and somehow they'll get this all out. No. It's past the point of no return. The U.S. government cannot pay off this debt, even if they confiscated everything owned by the American people, and we were all standing out in the streets naked and hungry, it still wouldn't be enough. So a collapse is inevitable. All you can choose as an American citizen is, are you going to throw good money after bad, or are you going to cut your losses and protect yourself? And there's another aspect to that question you should be thinking about. If you work hard and you throw as much money as the government is demanding, and right now Americans are paying more in taxes than they pay for their housing, food, and clothing put together. And if you go along with this thing, what are you actually going to get? Let's say that you somehow save the government from collapse, at least for the immediate future. What do you get? You still get a government that wants to spy on everything that you do, that is afraid of you, that wants to take away all of your constitutional rights to free expression. Such a deal. So, the Federal Reserve has called an emergency meeting for Monday, what they call expedited procedures. And the agenda says review and determination by the Board of Governors of the advance and discount rates to be charged by the Federal Reserve banks. I am willing to wager a plugged Turkish lira. They're talking about negative interest rates, which have worked so wonderfully well in places like Japan, right? So we'll see what happens on Monday. We've got to take a break for commercials. We'll be back after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And in answer to that caller's question here, apparently these Pearl Harbor coins, I'm looking at the website right now, they're actually made at the Perth Mint. And so their status as legal tender is not in the United States of America. It's in a foreign country. But they are solid gold and solid silver, and you need to look at the prices and see, because right now is a good time to be buying physical metal. Buy for the value of the metal. Don't buy for the numismatic or collectible value at all. All right, real quick, we're going to talk to Mateus in Canada. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Oh, hi, Michael. I just wanted to mention to any new listeners that don't really understand what we are talking about when we say debt slavery and the scam. Just an interesting way of thinking of it. Okay, so imagine that you're a country and I'm the Federal Reserve. So you come to me and say, hey, I need to borrow, $1,000 to run my country for the next year. So I give it to you and I say, okay, by the way, you're going to owe me $10 interest. And you're like, okay, sure, I'll get that back to you later. So then if you change your mind 5 minutes later and you go, wait a second, you know what, I don't want to be in debt. You give me the $100 back. I'm like, okay, and I just need that $10. You're like, oh, what 10? Well, you didn't give it to me. Well, you owe it to me. Well, where is it?
Yes, that's exactly it.
That's the debt slavery.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And we've illustrated it in several of the banker articles that we have at WhatReallyHappened.com. In fact, we illustrated it with an article called The 11th Marble. And that's why it is a trap and slavery, because the way private central banks are designed, they produce more debt than money with which to pay the debt. And that's why the debt can never, ever be paid off. It is a system of enslavement. It's rule by compound interest, and it's no more legitimate a form of governance than rule by divine right or rule by slavery. And like those former failed systems, it only works as long as people allow themselves to be brainwashed into thinking this is the way the world is supposed to be. So we all need to become private central bank heretics. Okay?
Yeah, it's a total scam. And then the Central Reserve, the system says, well, if you can't find that $10 to pay me back that doesn't exist, I'll take some corn, or I'll take part of your house, or I'll take... So they're actually stealing real value through this total scam. Yes. I know you know this. I'm just saying this in an interesting way.
Okay, well, Matthias, I hate to be short with you, but I've got a few things. I've got to let you go here because I got a few things I got to cover before the top of the hour, and Lady Claire gets on in here. Truck orders have plunged 37%. Unsold inventories soaring the most since 2007, except for Tesla. Their Model 3 looks to be a hot seller. They already have 325,000 reservations for that. Over at Victoria's Secret, they've gone through a management change. They're dumping their iconic catalog with all the supermodels and the slinky lingerie, and they're having to cut jobs. So that's another iconic American company that's in trouble. Russia and Iran are negotiating a canal from the Caspian Sea to the Persian Gulf, which will give Russia another access point to warm waters. So let's talk about human-caused global warming real quick. Snowburst triggers wrecks on I-94 near St. Michael. Snow and record cold set to invade Midwest and the East. Several inches of snow coming to Detroit could start during Tigers' home opener. Flurries this afternoon, snow tomorrow in Grand Rapids, Michigan. Storm knocks out power, falls trees in North Jersey. Snow brought, past tense, thunder, lightning, rain, hail, snow, and freezing temperatures. Now, we mentioned this next part yesterday, but we're going to hit it again. This is coming out of Washington Times. A newly released international study shows that the climate models, the computer models, the carbonazis have been wagging at us, don't accurately predict what's going on. And if you read my ClimateGate article, you'll see in the quote section down there where they're saying, well, we don't care what's going on in the real world. We're relying on the computer models to scare you into going along with our agenda. And so basically it's another confirmation. All of these predictions of disaster based on the computer models are nonsense. The computer models are wrong. Garbage in, garbage out. They certainly blew it back in 2000 saying snowfalls are a thing of the past. And the carbonazis are not giving up. You know, we've heard Loretta Lynch talking about suing global warming deniers. We know that there's a bunch of states' attorney generals are getting ready to file legal actions against global warming deniers. Burn the heretics at the stake. You will believe as the government tells you to believe. Don't give me facts and truth and reality and science. This is all about dogma and maintaining the slavery of the people. So, story coming out of naturalnews.com. The BBC has been ordered to stop giving any airtime to anybody who doubts the global warming hysteria. They're describing anybody who doubts the wisdom of human-caused global warming as a marginal view. Actually, it's the majority view right now. So, if you are on Windows 10, first of all, you need to update your Flash player right now. They discovered a security flaw just a day or two ago that would allow ransomware to be planted on your machine, and it appears to be targeted on Windows 10. I mean, haven't those poor people suffered enough as it is? So you need to update your Flash players on that. Windows 10 is now understood to be stealing your bandwidth and machine cycles. And the way they're doing it is Microsoft decided that they weren't making enough money, so they decided they were not going to be buying more servers to download Windows 10 to people who are upgrading. What they do is they're using a peer-to-peer system where anybody who's upgrading to Windows 10, they're not connecting with Microsoft, they're connecting to your desktop Windows 10 machine and downloading the updates from that. And it's peer-to-peer. And it's good for Microsoft because they're not having to spend additional money to put in new servers to deal with the volume of traffic, which hasn't been as great as they hoped. But, I mean, they're basically stealing your resources. And unfortunately, in that end-user license agreement that is written in very small print through dozens of pages so that you won't actually read it, you have given them permission to do that, to use your personal computer to support their commercial activities. Now, my computer is supposed to be working for me, not for Microsoft. That's my attitude. Security experts have discovered that the state Obamacare exchanges are wide open in terms of security. Millions of customers' data, including medical data, is at risk. Another wonderful blessing from Obamacare. Now, over in the EU, there's a case going on right now, and the issue is if you run a website and you link to content on another website that is pirated, but you don't know that it is, are you in violation of the law? And the current status of the lawsuit from the EU court is that no, you're not. The person who pirated the content is the pirate. And if you're just linking to it and you don't know it's stolen, then you're fine. And that's definitely good because the other side of this issue is that people who were not even aware that they were linking to pirated content could be sued by the copyright holders. And that, of course, would be a tremendous financial boom for the copyright holders and very bad for people who are running websites. Now, obviously, being in the creative industries myself for much of my life, my sympathies are with the copyright holders. If you like the music, if you like the TV show, if you like the movie, do the right thing and pay for it so that those people who made that product you like can go out and make another. Now, we've had another vaccine whistleblower who stepped out of the shadows, Dr. Peter Fletcher. He was the chief scientific officer at the Department of Health in Great Britain. And he's out there saying that, yes, this triple vaccine, the MMR vaccine, is a major, major problem. By the way, you remember when Vaxxed was pulled from the film show down in Houston? Turns out the order for that came right from the mayor's office. The mayor of Houston called that film festival in Houston and said, you will not show that film. I wonder how much stock in the pharmaceutical industries the mayor happens to have. We got to take a break for our top of the hour news and commercials. And when we come on back, we've got a phone call waiting. Please wait patiently. And the lovely Lady Claire. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Hour number 3. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645. And for those of you watching on BAM Music, this gorgeous creature sitting behind me is the lovely Lady Claire, here for her Friday third hour perspective. But before we let her start talking, we do have a caller who's been waiting very, very patiently. Brian in Pennsylvania. Aloha, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Mike, can you hear me okay?
I can hear you just fine.
All right, I was watching InfoWars, cause they had a little segment, and I usually don't watch it, but I like David Knight, so I watch it when David Knight does it. And he was saying that the Cruz campaign was going into states that Trump has already won and, bribing the delegates that after the first-round ballot pick for the the Trump nominee or the RNC, they were going to automatically switch their sides, and they were putting in Cruz candidates to be delegates.
Yeah, I mean, this whole delegate process has just been completely messed up. And, of course, Hillary started it all with her guaranteed superdelegates, and Sanders is trying to challenge them. And we've got the head of the GOP is out there saying that on the first ballot, in point of fact, the GOP delegates are under no obligation to obey the wishes of the primary voters and caucusers in their states. So, I mean, the whole process is being hijacked to serve the money junkies and the warmongers and the power freaks. And again, the basic contract between the government and the American people is we get to pick the leaders whom we give our consent to govern the nation. And if we're not picking our leaders, all bets are off.
Yeah, to me, it just seemed like there was this big hamstring going on, and it's just like, wow, it's like I can't believe it. One of the people at that I talk to all the time said that he hates that Pennsylvania has such a late primary because the candidates are always picked beforehand. Well, this year it's like a complete joke. Now it's like, who knows what's going to happen by the end of the year.
Yeah, I mean, we're looking at a possibility that not just the GOP, but even the Democratic convention could go to a brokered convention because Bernie Sanders is closing in on Hillary. And if you've got the head of the DNC up there insisting there won't be a brokered convention, that tells you that they're worried that that's exactly where they're headed. Okay?
All right.
All right.
Mike, take it easy. Say hi to Claire for me.
Well, she was listening to you just now, and we're going to let you go. And Lady Claire, what is your first story?
Well, it has been a rather difficult week for Bubba, I did not have sex with that woman, Clinton. Black activists have heckled, turned on former President Clinton, and accused him of destroying their communities. It's no secret that one of the core support groups behind Hillary's presidential campaign are black voters, which is why it came as a surprise when none other than Bill Clinton faced down protesters angry at the impact of his 1994 crime reforms, which have had on black Americans, and defended the record of his wife, Hillary Clinton, who is relying on the support of black voters in her quest for the presidency. As Reuters reported, the former president spent more than 10 minutes confronting the protesters at a campaign rally in Philadelphia for his wife over criticisms that the crime bill he approved while president led to a surge in the imprisonment of black people in this country. Clinton's speech devolved into confusion when several protesters heckled the former president mid-speech and held up signs, including one that read, "Clinton crime bill destroyed our communities." And some saw him as dismissive of the Black Lives Matter movement, a national outgrowth of anger over a string of encounters in which police officers killed unarmed black people. Janetta Etsy, a civil rights activist, wrote online that Clinton can't handle being confronted by his own record. She wrote, "This is like watching a robot malfunction," and she was referring to Bill and not Hillary. Has he managed to lose a significant portion of the black vote through this?
Well, he's made all these really bad moves all during the campaign.
Oh, yeah.
He actually went into polling places up in Massachusetts, which is an election law violation.
Yeah.
And interestingly enough, I think it's Slate magazine just came on out with an observation that maybe in his heart of hearts, Bill Clinton doesn't want Hillary to be president because that would diminish his own stature of having been president. But he's not turning out to be a tremendous asset to her campaign at all.
No, and he seems to be on a path toward a number of self-inflicted wounds with these statements.
Well, the Clintons have always been doing these self-inflicted wounds, and then somehow they're always able to bribe or blackmail their way out of the consequences.
Yes, and another thing that did not go so swimmingly for him this week. Bill Clinton's welfare reform law is kicking up to 1 million people off of food stamps. And as of, I believe, April 1st. And it's thanks to the welfare reform law Bill Clinton signed in 1996. And Clinton promised to put an end to welfare as we know it. And he said, they say the welfare reform bill increased poverty. Then why did we have the largest drop in African-American poverty in history when I was president, the largest in history? Well, poverty declined across the board in the years following the law's enactment, thanks in large part to a good economy. But when poverty rates rose again, and as a result of the law's strictures, a dwindling percentage of poor people now receive welfare benefits. And to me, this is absolutely criminal.
This is especially impacting down in Georgia.
Oh, yeah.
They're really feeling the bite down there. It is a mess, and we're seeing with the cuts to the food stamp program and the rest of it. I mean, the government is spending trillions for the F-35, another $500 million for special features at the bases to equip it, guns to the Mexican drug cartels, surface-to-air missiles to the terrorists in Syria. Our government is taking all of our money and they're spending it everywhere except on the American people and the American nation. Yeah. And I think Americans, it's time for us to get angry about that. Yeah. Because the government of the United States of America is not our master. They are our employees. We allow them to manage our sovereignty and our nation as long as they comply with that Constitution and the Bill of Rights.
Right.
And they're here to make our lives better, not the other way around.
Absolutely. Absolutely. The next thing that I noticed today, The Pentagon has admitted, no surprise here, temporary Marines in Iraq have no scheduled departure date. Under a negotiated deal with Iraq, the U.S. is allowed to deploy a maximum of 3,870 ground troops in the nation at any given time. In spite of this, the Pentagon has conceded that they have closer to 5,000 troops inside Iraq. They insist that this isn't technically a violation because those extra troops are just temporary. But how temporary? Well, that's not so clear. Pentagon spokesperson Colonel Stephen Warren today conceded that the 200 U.S. Marines at Firebase Bell are all temporary, but there is no scheduled exit date for their operation.
They're trainers, they're advisors, really, just like in Vietnam. They're not there to fight.
Yeah, and this potentially means that a deployment lasting years on end and means that the temporary troops are no more temporary than any other U.S. troops deployed anywhere else, as long as the Pentagon has the figures they say that they need to keep the troops in Iraq.
Boy.
Yeah.
But I think at this point we all have to sit back and say that nothing we are hearing from the Pentagon, the government, the establishment media should be accepted at face value.
Never.
The motto of our entire power structure is, if at first you don't succeed, lie again. It's almost like that old Maxwell Smart TV series, Mel Brooks' first big comedy success. Would you believe? Would you believe? No, I wouldn't believe that. Well, how about this? Will you believe this one over here?
Oh, well.
All right, we're coming up on another commercial break here, and when we come on back, we'll have more from the lovely Lady Claire on this, our Pauhana Friday broadcast. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And Lady Claire, you wanted to talk about?
There are things going on in Iraq that we are not being told. It's certainly not on the major prostitute news sources and news feeds. This comes to us from Global Research out of Canada, which does have a lot of credible information. Apparently, within the last couple of weeks, 216 have been killed in Iraq as Fallujah faces starvation. Apparently, U.S. troops are firing weapons every day at Firebase Bell near Makmur, according to military spokesman Colonel Steve Warren. 6 civilians have died of starvation, including 3 children in Fallujah, where the situation is getting desperate. If help does not arrive soon, more could die. And then this in from Felicity Arbuthnot, again, Global Research. And she writes the headline of this article, U.S. War Crimes in Iraq, Fallujah residents starving, murdered, besieged by U.S.-backed government forces and ISIS. Apparently, the Human Rights Watch organization has written a report indicating that near unbelievably, residents of the besieged city of Fallujah are starving. Iraqi government forces should urgently allow aid to enter the city, and the extremist group Islamic State, also known as ISIS, which captured the city in early 2014, should allow civilians to leave. And apparently Fallujah is now under siege by the U.S.-imposed Iraqi puppet government and ISIS, as people demonstrate in the thousands in protest at yet another American-backed administration, which has brought nothing but misery to the population.
Well, that's what they're there for.
Yeah.
Every U.S.-backed administration, impoverishes the nation and transfers the wealth to America.
Yeah. Incredibly, U.S. Vice President Smiling Joe Biden and Iranian Major General Qasem Soleimani have come together to make clear that no attempt should be made to unseat the current Prime Minister, Haider al-Abadi. And that was reported by Reuters on the 6th of this month. The people of Fallujah are besieged by the government, trapped by ISIS, and starving. Since government forces recaptured nearby Ramadi, the capital of Anbar government, in late December, and the Al Jazeera Desert area north of Fallujah in March of 2016, they have cut off all the supply lines into the city, 3 Iraqi officials have said. Tens of thousands of civilians from an original population of more than 300,000 remain inside the city. And this is so bad that Human Rights Watch has obtained a list of 140 people, including young children, who've died in the last couple of months from lack of food and medicine. The names have been withheld for fear that ISIS, which forbids the population making contact outside the city, would punish the relatives of the dead. Now, here's what these people are reduced to on your tax dollar and in your name, folks. Residents are reported to be eating bread made from flour from ground date stones and soup made from grass. Food is still available, but it's sold at staggering prices. A 50-kilogram sack of flour goes for U.S. $750 and a bag of sugar $500. In Baghdad, just 70 kilometers away, the same amount of flour costs $15 and of sugar $40. And every day, starving kids arrive at the local hospital, and it's not soon enough for them. Now, Mike, we notice that Muqtada al-Sadr has come back in a big way.
Yes.
And what is going to happen if the reforms that he is urging the Iraqi government to make are not made? I have a feeling that he's got his finger on the pulse of a popular movement which could absolutely explode that situation.
At which point the U.S. would gin up some excuse to reinvade Iraq again. This would be invasion number, 6? Something
like that. Yeah. Something like that. But, I wish that there was someone in the U.S. government who is thinking about what if the popular movement that is being supported by al-Sadr gets the band back together. And by that, I mean the Mahdi army. I mean, this was the guy who told the U.S. government, if your folks are not out of Iraq the very moment the SOFA agreement tells you to be, you're fair game. All of your troops are fair game for our warriors. This could absolutely collapse in the U.S.'s face.
Well, if you really think about it, I think the U.S. would welcome an opportunity to exert more control over Iraq because even the installed U.S. puppet regime has been straining at the leash lately.
Yeah.
And that's getting to be a problem in all the U.S. puppet states. And I think at some point the U.S. Is going to want to try and make an example of one of these nations to get all these other little provincial governors, so to speak, back in line. But there's absolutely no question that this U.S. agenda to conquer, control all of the oil-rich nations of the Middle East has fallen apart.
Yeah.
If you go back to General Wesley Clark in 2003 when he blew the whistle on this plan, it was supposed to have all been over in 2008 with the conquest of Iran. And here we are in 2016. We've had to go back into Yemen, having to go back into Libya, having to go back into Iraq, having to go back into Afghanistan. Iran is still untouched as of the moment, although they're continuing to try and lay a propaganda campaign to get us into that war. And the American people are pretty much fed up with this war economy. They're fed up with all the lies they're being told to support the wars. And from where I sit, the U.S. is already losing this new war.
Yeah. I would agree with you 100%. And if the changes do not come about and soon for Iraq, I think that al-Sadr may be able to literally storm the existing government by force and take over.
I agree with you.
Yeah.
Because the Iraqi people are definitely with him in terms of they understand. They were conquered by the United States. They're living under a puppet ruler. They don't like it any more than the Iranians did. They don't like it any more than the Chileans did. They don't like it any more than the Cubans did or the Filipinos. They don't like it any more than any of these countries, and they're going to do something about it.
Yeah, yeah. And I don't think it's going to be too much longer before we see a real pushback from the Iraqi people if they're not getting their needs met, and so many of them are not.
I would absolutely agree. And at this point, here's the reality. Despite all the money being spent on these wonder weapons, the F-35 and F-22 and the Gerald Ford and the new littoral combat ships and everything, the reality is that all of the U.S. military stockpiles have been drawn down. We're running out of war materiel. There was that big story that came out a couple of weeks ago about how some of our special forces don't have the proper equipment, don't even, in some cases, don't even have the rifles. We're literally running out of material with which to fight these wars. And that's another reason why I say the U.S. is losing this one. We've got to take a break for commercials. We'll be back. We've got a caller waiting on the line, and we'll be right back. Hello, hi, America. Welcome back to our show. And rather ironic timing following Claire's last story. The We Hate Donald Trump News Network, formerly Fox News, was actually just now, over the break, running a story about recent polls taken in Iraq. And they're basically indicating the majority of the Iraqi people do not trust U.S. motives in Iraq. 1/3 of the Iraqi people think the U.S. is behind all the acts of terror that are going on, which, yeah, we know that that's certainly true. And it's amazing. I mean, the situation has to be serious. If Fox News is actually reporting this and admitting this, that the people of Iraq, they want the U.S. gone. They want their country back. All right, we're going to take a phone call here real quick. So, Steve in Massachusetts, aloha, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Mike. Hi, Claire. How you doing?
Hello. Great.
I want to talk to you about the Internet.
Okay.
And, when the TV came out, the globalists wasted no time in using it to control the people's minds.
Mm-hmm.
And I think with the Internet, they wanted to do the same thing to have a better control of the people and tracking.
Yes.
Well, I think they kind of didn't think it was going to have so much influence on the people on the revelation of everything that's been going on as far as false flags and information going out. I think they really miscalculated on the awakening.
Yeah, well, you need to remember that when DARPA originally created what was then called the DARPANet, it was never intended to be made available to ordinary citizens. It was supposed to be confined to military bases and universities that were participating in military contracts. And DARPA was funding the companies that supported the backbone. And in the 1970s, DARPA basically came out to all these companies that were running the backbone servers on the DARPANet and said, here's your check for next year, but we've got some rules regarding who is and who is not allowed to have access to this. And all of these companies said, you can keep your check, we'll cover the costs ourselves. And in hacker lore, that was called the Great Revolt. That's the day when the DARPANet became the Internet, and it escaped the control of the government. And it has profoundly changed the way information flows through our society as dramatically as when Gutenberg rediscovered movable type printing, which resulted in books that were affordable to the middle class. And literacy bloomed, and people were finding out things that the rulers didn't want them to find out. Now, with TV and radio, originally, they tried to keep the ownership dispersed and diversified to preserve a variety of opinions. Today, of course, it's all collected together and under very few individuals' control. But they can't do that to the Internet. There are simply too many of us out here, Internet broadcasters, webmasters, and they can't buy and bribe all of us. And they've tried to co-opt some of the higher profile people. But the audience is now so sophisticated, we recognize when somebody has been co-opted, and they'll just go off and find other sources. And the government was a little late realizing just what was going on, because they've continued to try and control our society with the propaganda tricks that worked at the height of the old Cold War, 1950s and 1960s, but those methods really don't work any longer, and they're just now really beginning to figure that out. And they're trying to find some way they can justify shutting down all the independent blogs and independent broadcasters without harming the Internet itself, which has now become a mainstay of our economic activity.
I think it may be too late. I mean, if
you
were to ask somebody 10 years ago what a false flag was, then majority of people wouldn't even know. And you look at what people know now and what they didn't know then about the history, the corruption and everything. It's an explosion of information. It's unbelievable of how many people are waking up.
Absolutely.
And, it's a good tool to have.
Oh, yeah. I mean, if there had been an Internet back, in Nazi Germany, Hitler would have stayed in art school, probably.
One more thing real quick.
Yeah.
Last week you mentioned how people are now living in freight containers and smaller apartments and in cars.
Yes.
If you notice the programming on TV, they have a show called Tiny Houses.
Yes.
And it had one example where this family of 6 was living in a 2,000 square feet home, and they're moving into a small house of 200 feet where the kids would have no rooms to themselves, and the kids were all happy and excited to move in, and it's so.
Well, that's part of the Agenda 21, but because home ownership is a major foundation of America's debt-based economic structure. We're actually seeing city and county governments start to outlaw micro-apartments and container homes. They want you to buy the bigger homes because then you go deeper into debt and you keep the banks happy. So it's another case of competing agendas colliding with each other.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, well, that's all I wanted to say.
All right, well, thank you very much for the phone call. Now back to the Lady Claire.
Yes, apparently, a couple of days ago, a 100-member group of the Turkish army troops crossed the border from Turkey to Syria's northwestern province of Idlib. The Turkish soldiers crossed into the Syrian terrorist-held province of Idlib from the Bab al-Hawa border crossing. Apparently, this area has been a real bone of contention in Syria. But, Mike, what do you think about the timing? Who are these guys? Why now have they gone into that area of Syria? What's going on?
Well, right now, the U.S. and Turkey and Saudi Arabia are scrambling to find some way that they can reverse the situation going on in Syria. With the assistance of the Russians, Assad and the Syrian forces have all but driven ISIS out. And ISIS was the excuse the U.S. was using to wage war on Syria. And now that justification is all but gone. So they're looking at some other way they can provoke a confrontation where the U.S. can say, oh, well, we have to go in and save those poor Syrian people from whatever it is they're going to make up. Now, technically, what Turkey has just done is an act of war. Sending military forces into another country without that government's permission is an act of war. 100, that's a very small force. That's a reconnaissance in force at best. So they may be going on in there. We know that other Turkish forces were setting up fire bases on the Syrian side of the border, and maybe what Erdogan wants to do is to basically reassert his control over that border, because through that border, Turkey has been getting stolen Syrian oil and stolen Syrian antiquities, off of which Erdogan and his family are making a huge, huge profit. So that may be what's going on here, is they're trying to basically regain control of the border so that that wealth continues to pour out of Syria and into Erdogan's pocket.
Yes. And how likely do you think that is, and what do you think Russia's going to do?
Russia right now is standing down from ground combat. They're still there with air support. They're providing logistics and equipment. Russia's attitude right now is it's now up to Assad and the Syrian army to deal with it. And Syria's making progress. It's only a matter of time before all of these U.S.-backed terrorist groups and front groups. And by the way, the U.S. has now officially acknowledged that al-Nusra and al-Qaeda are really the same people. They tried to rebrand to get away from the public awareness that al-Qaeda was a creation of the U.S. Oh, we've got this new group, al-Nusra. No, it's the same group. They just rebranded. Okay, we'll call them ISIS next week, and the week after that we'll call them the Liberation Army of the Islamic State of we're going to come get you if you don't get us first. Yeah,
it seems to me that if the Syrian army is successful
when they're successful,
that the U.S. will have absolutely no excuse to go into Syria and do some sort of decap strike on al-Assad.
Well, they may go ahead and do a decap strike and claim it was a terrorist attack by ISIS. I don't see the U.S. giving up, because if they lose the momentum on this agenda, the U.S. economy is going to collapse. They're stuck. They're in a real corner. We've got to take a break for commercials. Back with the last segment of our program after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Last segment of our program on this Pauhana Friday. And Claire?
Well, I need to go back to the situation in Yemen, where a U.S.-enabled Saudi military has been bombing the heck out of civilians. And again, this comes to us from Global Research in Canada. Apparently, a U.S.-made bomb killed 119 civilians in Saudi airstrike against Yemen last month. They attacked a crowded marketplace in the North Yemeni Shiite town of Mastaba. The attack was one of the most deadly strikes on civilians since the war began, a conflict which has killed in excess of 3,000 civilian bystanders, most of the time in airstrikes. And Human Rights Watch, which investigated the incident, found evidence that the deaths were caused by a U.S.-made bomb the GBU-31 satellite-guided bomb.
Which means they intended to hit that marketplace.
Yeah, you're talking about women, children, infants, the medically fragile, older people, and apparently...
You're talking about war crimes is what you're talking about.
And apparently the U.S. has sold no less than 400 such bombs to Saudi Arabia, a government whose political and social rights are just to the right of Attila the Hun since November. And, you know, you read bits and pieces. You don't get a lot in the corporate news at all, but you read bits and pieces. Your heart just breaks. There was a story of a little boy who was dying of malnutrition. They got the child to a hospital, but it was way too late, and the NG tube couldn't save him. This is being done, folks, with your tax dollars and in your name. Innocent civilians are getting killed, massacred, and crippled every day.
Now, what I would like to know, as you know, Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders traded some words the other day where Hillary Clinton was demanding that Bernie Sanders apologize to the survivors of Sandy Hook because Bernie Sanders was opposed to Hillary's suggestion of being able to sue weapons manufacturers for the crimes committed with their weapons. Well, Saudi Arabia has just committed a war crime with this satellite-guided bomb that is made by an American company. So I want somebody to get in Hillary's face and ask if she wants to sue these bomb makers for the crimes being committed by Saudi Arabia with these weapons.
Oh, that I would love to see that happen.
Yes.
I would love to see that happen. But, you know, it's all about the money. And last fall also, in the UK, the highest levels of governments invited the Saudis to their arms fair, and the Saudis bought millions of dollars worth of arms from the UK. And these arms are also showing up in attacks against civilian infrastructure in Yemen.
Well, it's all good for business, you know, more bang for your buck. And I think the Saudis are buying American weapons mostly because of treaty obligations, because we know that the American weapons are very expensive. They're not as good. Russia's apparently struggling to fill orders for their S-400 air defense system after it was put on display in Syria.
Right.
But it is all mass death, and I keep thinking back to that quote from George Bernard Shaw. There's nothing in man's industry but his greed and his sloth. His heart is in his weapons. Yep. And certainly that's true in our society. You know, forget all about the rhetoric and the propaganda and the political speeches. What a government wants is what they spend the money on. And our government just spends huge amounts of money on mass machinery of death.
Yeah.
And they spend it very wastefully as well.
Yeah. I'm hoping, I don't know that this is going to happen, but I'm hoping we do not have a major confrontation with either Russia or China right now, because we don't have the weaponry, we don't have the troop strength, we don't have the manufacturing, and we don't have the money to pursue a positive outcome to a war against Russia and China. That just doesn't exist for the American military.
And that's why the risk of a nuclear exchange is very high. And even with a nuclear exchange, I am not sure that the United States would prevail even then, because the latest generation of Russian and Chinese weapons, nuclear weapons, are designed to simply bypass this ballistic missile defense system, the Star Wars system. They have been very clever in coming up with these new weapons that are impossible to predict where they're going to go in the next second. Yeah. And without that, everything the U.S. has built at huge expense over the last decades is already obsolete.
Yeah. And that ties into my last story for the program today. The chief of the U.S. Army says that the U.S. needs another 220,000 troops to handle major operations. Speaking to Congress today with an eye on major additional spending hikes, Army Chief of Staff General Mark Milley warned that the planned force strength of 980,000 troops was far too small, and there is a high military risk for the U.S. to only have about 1 million troops. General Milley said, "There is no way we can meet the imminent threats that we have around the world, and that to handle all major operations planned, he wants at least another 220,000 troops on top of the planned number." Milley estimated the cost at $1 billion for every additional 10,000 soldiers trained, and warned that America would risk literally having a hollow army if the money wasn't spent, suggesting domestic military bases might have to be closed, something Congress almost universally opposes. Now, Mike, is it just me, or do you feel a draft coming on here?
I feel a draft coming on probably one day after the November election.
Yeah.
Because, any talk about a draft bill now is definitely going to work against the incumbents. It's going to work against anybody who's advocating a draft bill. But recruitment is down despite all the glitzy commercials.
Mm-hmm.
The VA scandal has got parents talking to their kids about what's really going on. When you get enlisted, there's no guarantee you're going to get the training they promise you.
Yeah.
They're looking at all the people who are coming back from these war zones, mentally deranged, if not outright crippled.
Yeah.
The VA is just letting people die on off. They're exposed to radioactive material, toxic chemicals, and real war. It doesn't look like those video games.
No, it certainly doesn't. And one thing that our troops who have been in the Fallujah area and in Iraq are realizing, they've been hit with the depleted uranium just as much as the Iraqis were, and they're coming down with terrible illnesses, cancers, children who are terribly malformed and will never have the promise of a normal life.
And that's another thing that's being hidden from the American people, and especially from young people who might want to enlist in the military.
Yeah.
And it's a horrible price for our young people who put on that uniform to pay to go through that war, come on back, start a family, and then have a seriously deformed baby as their reward for their service.
Yeah.
That depleted uranium munition, it's the gift that keeps on giving. It's got a half-life of 4 billion years.
Yeah, it's really criminal. I find that as I get older, and I turn 67 next month, that's okay. I don't mind it at all. But I look at war.
Happy birthday to you. I'm sorry.
May I finish?
Yes,
This
2
is
minutes.
serious. Okay. I look at war as a way of resolving geopolitical differences and problems, as a terribly morally and fiscally wasteful way of resolving them. My thought is, put the diplomats in a room, make sure it's got good food, places to sleep, good plumbing, lock the door, and don't unlock it until they have come out with a negotiated good faith agreement.
Well,
where each side wins.
You're forgetting what von Clausewitz said, which is war is an extension of politics by other means.
Yes, I remember.
War is what you get when you want to take and you don't want to give anything back. Or in our case, you've got nothing to give back.
Yeah.
So you just have to take it all. All right, well, we're coming up here on the end of the show on this Kaahumanu Friday. And in fact, there's the music right there. So Claire and I are going to head on out of here and have some fun on this Friday afternoon in our beautiful Oahu weather, except it looks like there's actually rain out there.
Oh, no.
We'll be back Monday here on the Genesis Communication Network. Until then, have a really good weekend. Stay informed. Make good choices. Share what you know with everybody that you know. Thanks to everybody who's donating to the website. We really appreciate all of your generous support. We'll be back Monday. Aloha, America.